All right, welcome back to the Elias Macco Show. Now, 3 weeks before the Online News Act, Bill C-18, comes into an effect, an agreement has been reached between the federal government and Google. So Google will continue to share Canadian news online, and they're going to make payments to Canadian news companies of about around $100 million under this deal. Why did Google come to this deal? Why haven't they held the harder line that we've seen from some other companies like Meta? Let's find out more. Michael Geist is the Canada Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce Law at the University of Ottawa, and he joins us once again. Michael, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And I know we've talked about this. You've been a big detractor of Bill C-18 and what the federal government has been trying to do here. Pascal Saint-Onge yesterday crowing over this deal. I mean, she made François-Philippe Champagne's celebration over his deals with the grocery stores, which weren't really deals, seemed pale in comparison. So what's your reaction to the government is saying, hey, this is this is a win, this is a victory. What say you?
Well, listen, I think it's a good thing that there's a deal, because clearly the negative impact for the news sector, for individual Canadians, and certainly even for Google, if there wasn't some sort of compromise, was really bad news all around. But to paint this as a big win by the government is a little bit hard to square with, I think, the facts. The amount is far below what the government, even just a couple of months ago, was saying that they thought they would get. They've had to overhaul the law effectively to be able to get there. So kind of just tossed aside many of the principles that they said were core to the legislation in order to get a deal. And that deal is roughly what Google had said they were open to doing about a year ago. And then you toss in the fact that it's not even really $100 million in new money, because Google has existing deals that will now be canceled and folded into the $100 million. And you've got to subtract, I think, the real losses that have occurred based on Meta having exited the market. And it feels a lot more like saving face, to be honest, than a big win.
So why do you think, though, if it's so easy to save face, right? And if you could settle for much less than what the government wanted, why is there such a difference between how Google has approached this versus Meta, which is, Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and more? Why is there a difference between how those two companies have dealt with this?
Oh, I think it's been pretty clear from the outset that the two companies valued news differently. And I think anybody who uses both of those platforms would recognize why that's the case. So, Google goes out and they do grab the content for indexing purposes, not republishing, but for indexing to try to make it easier for people to find. And there's value there. Not that they're necessarily making a ton of money off the advertising against news stories, but they certainly have value to it in ensuring that they've got a comprehensive search index and you can find the information you're looking for when you conduct a search. If you contrast that with Meta and Facebook, where they don't post the articles, it's their users, often the publishers themselves, that are posting it. It's not even, and in fact, they're not even the articles. It's just links to the articles that sends traffic back to the underlying site. In many ways, for a social media platform whose main goal is to keep users on their platform for as long as possible, to capture as much data and to serve as many ads as possible, news is just like bad content. It runs counter to your whole goal. So I think the difference in approach is easily explained by the differences that each company has with respect to the value that news brings to them.
Do you think, because obviously there's a whole bunch of ways governments can deal with this issue, right? Because, we have traditional media that has been showing a decline. Some would argue that it's important for a democracy to have those functions. There's a whole bunch of ways you can handle that. Would you have opted towards, because the other way they could have taken this is far more deregulation, far more, level playing fields by getting governments and regulatory bodies out of it. Was that something you would have wanted to see here?
Well, I don't think deregulation would solve the issues, because much of the focus has been on traditional newspapers and some of the emerging digital players, and they're not highly regulated at all. So they're not part of that regulatory system anyway. So I don't know that would achieve a whole lot to assist them. I think part of the problem here is that the government solution isn't doing a ton to help them. So even if you take the $100 million as $100 million, the Parliamentary Budget Officer estimates that 3/4 of that is going to go to broadcasters. So now you're left with $25 million for all print and digital publications across the country to split somehow. And at the same time, some of those same players are losing some of their existing deals. They've lost them with Meta. They're likely to lose them with Google because now they're paying through this $100 million instead. Many of them actually, I think, get less out of this than they were getting before, which helps explain why the government also, just a week or so ago in its fall economic statement, announced an expanded bailout as part of its tax credit system for journalists. And that is only available to print. So this feels like the two are kind of working together. The government knew that it's blundered here, and they're looking for some way to make those print whole. And the way they're doing it is primarily through tax credits and getting this deal, which most of the benefit will accrue to broadcasters.
So, getting back to the difference here between Google and Meta, and I would agree, I think news search, for me at least, I know it's core to the Google search product. If they weren't able to return news results when I did a search, my eyeballs would be on Google far, far less. Alternatively, when I look at Instagram and Facebook, I don't know if by removing news, the time spent in apps is changing for most Canadians. So, what do you think the government should do now with that big company Meta that hasn't come to the table? That doesn't seem willing to play ball. What next on that end of things?
Yeah, that's a good question. And obviously Meta was asked that, and the responses it's given so far is that nothing has really changed, that it believes the law is fundamentally flawed, and the notion of paying for news in this way is just something that's anathema to where their business model is at. I think is likely where they're going to continue to stay. But the approach that the government took here, as I alluded to a little earlier, is basically to dispense with the whole framework that the law had in the first place. I mean, the whole idea was the government wasn't going to get involved in negotiations. It was going to leave it to the parties to do all the negotiating and the CRTC to approve the deals. Instead, the government now has directly negotiated with Google. It's come up with a number, and it's basically said, we're not interested in what the CRTC had to say. We're saying this is good enough. Well, if you dispensed with the entire approach in the legislation, it's certainly open to go to Meta and say, you know what, all those old rules don't apply. Let's find a way to get you back into the game, small amount of money, just so that we can save a bit of face here. But mainly what we want is you to restore the links, because that's causing real harm to many of our publishers. Would Meta do that? I mean, they've made it clear they're not really willing to pay, but if the government came up with some sort of offer, you never know.
And this government does seem very focused on optics, right? I mean, I made the joke about François-Philippe Champagne and his grocery stuff, right? No evidence anything worked on that front, but boy, he was able to have press conferences and talk to media and say, we did it. We fixed the grocery store companies. If Facebook will allow Pascal Saint-Onge to have a press conference that say, hey, we're going to give some money, you think that's what really the government is now after at the end of the day?
Well, I think that for them, they would surely like to hit the reset button on that aspect of the legislation. They obviously took the position that Facebook was bluffing and made a big mistake in doing so, and it's caused real harm. We know that there are many publishers that have said this is reducing the amount of traffic they have significantly, and that's simply lost revenues. There's no way around it. I think that the main effect that has had is actually to create the strongest impetus possible to get a deal with Google. I talked to any number of publishers over the last number of months, and the consensus always was that Facebook was harmful, Google would be devastating, and that a deal was desperately needed.
Michael, we have to leave it there. Thanks for the conversation.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That's Michael Geist, Canada Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce Law at the University of Ottawa. When we return on the Elias Macko Show, something could be changing when it comes to snow removal in your part of town, and it might allow you to have a better night's sleep. We'll take a look at that next.